Hello, my name is Lauren Yeomans, and I'm Principal Flute of the Etobicoke Philharmonic Orchestra. In anticipation of our upcoming concert, Demons and Angels, I'm doing a deep dive into Antonín Dvořák's 8th Symphony as part of our series, Listen and Learn with Lauren. Come and join me for the journey. Antonín Dvořák was a Czech composer born in 1841, back when Czechia was still a part of the Austrian Empire. He came from a family of butchers and innkeepers, but his father was a professional zither player on the side. His parents recognized his musical talent from a young age, but they wanted him to work towards becoming a church organist, so they sent him to the organ school in Prague. Everything at the school was taught in German, and while he knew a little of the language, the other students bullied him relentlessly for his broken German and making fun of his dabbling in composition. Even still, he graduated second in his class and went on to have a career as a violinist and a violist, playing in the Bohemian Provisional Theatre Orchestra under composer Bedřich Smetana, nationally considered to be the father of Czech music and composer of Vltava or the Moldau. In 1871, at age 30, Dvořák abandoned his performing career to focus on composition, taking a post as an organist in a small church and devoting his time to writing. His work started gaining recognition in Prague, and a few years later he applied for and won the Austrian State Prize for Composition, with one of the members of the jury being his hero, Johannes Brahms. Brahms was immediately impressed with Dvořák's work and decided to champion the young composer, recommending Dvořák's Moravian duets to his German publisher Simrock. The duets were successful, so the publisher suggested that Dvořák write something akin to Brahms's Hungarian dances, so Dvořák submitted his first set of Slavonic dances, first for piano 4 hands, then for full orchestra, one of which we played during our great sing-off concert last season. These were wildly successful and essentially launched Dvořák's international career. In 1888, Dvořák was appointed a professor at the Prague Conservatory, an institution where he eventually became the director. It was during this time that Dvořák was introduced to Tchaikovsky. And both composers immediately became friends, greatly admiring each other's music. Dvořák attended the Prague premiere of Tchaikovsky's 5th Symphony, which we will be performing in March, and Eugene Onegin, of which he wrote, "I joyfully confess that your opera made a big and profound impression on me, precisely of the kind that I always expect from a true work of art." Tchaikovsky at the same time felt that Dvořák's music must be performed in Russia, and reached out to his contacts to have Dvořák conduct concerts of his own works both in Moscow and St. Petersburg. It was while Dvořák was writing back and forth over which pieces would be performed on these concerts that Dvořák started to outline the 8th Symphony. Dvořák wrote his 8th Symphony in August of 1889 in the small highland town of Vysoká Šibrami, where he visited his brother-in-law, Count Václav Kaunik, during the summers. At first he would stay in his brother-in-law's neo-Renaissance castle, but eventually he purchased a plot of land on the estate with an old building, which has since been converted into a Dvořák museum. It was here where he wrote many works among the natural beauty of the scenic hills, including his opera Rusalka, which is why the building is now known as the Villa Rusalka. By the time that Dvořák wrote the 8th Symphony, his relationship with his publisher Simrock had soured somewhat. Despite his many compositional supporters, he was dealing with endless anti-Czech sentiments, particularly in Vienna, where Czech nationalism was viewed as a threat to imperial control. Simrock kept wanting to publish his works under the more German-sounding name Anton as opposed to the Czech Antonín, but Dvořák was strongly opposed to abandoning his cultural roots. It all came to a head when Dvořák, as part of his contract, gave Simrock the first offer for his 8th Symphony, which Simrock offered him a third of the amount of money that they had given him for his previous symphony. At this point, they were trying to encourage him to write more chamber music and piano works, things that would make the publisher more money, so this was an active form of discouragement against the larger pieces he was inclined to write at the time. Dvořák was furious, and took his symphony to the British publisher Novello, who was very eager to publish this work. The British absolutely loved Dvořák, particularly his Stabat Mater, a grand work for choir and orchestra which was wildly popular in a country known for its strong choral tradition. Because of all of this, Dvořák ultimately didn't conduct the 8th Symphony on his big trip to Russia, mostly because he felt he wanted to give the international premiere of this work to the British, who had saved the day. Because of this, the Eighth Symphony has occasionally been referred to as the English Symphony, although aesthetically the English didn't really have much of an influence on this work. Dvořák conducted both the world premiere in Prague as well as the British premiere in London, which was such a massive success to the British public that they all burst into applause at the end of every movement, with the press hailing him as the lone true successor to Beethoven. He later conducted the symphony again at Cambridge University when he was receiving his honorary doctorate from the institution. A year later, thanks to the championing of conductor Hans Richter, the symphony was included in a Vienna Philharmonic concert to great success, with Richter writing to the composer, "You would certainly have been thrilled by this performance. We all feel that this is a superb work, and that is why we are all so enthusiastic about it. The triumph was both fervent and heartfelt." The Vienna Free Press lauded the work, writing, "This entire work is one of Dvořák's best. Dvořák is a serious artist who has learned much, but despite his knowledge, he has not sacrificed spontaneity and freshness. His works give voice to a singular individual who emanates a refreshing breath of innovation and originality." The symphony certainly had its critics as well. Some concluded it should be considered a tone poem, which is a single movement work that's written to evoke a non-musical source, like a poem or a story, but not a symphony because of its supposedly having a loose episodic nature of a variety of tunes, which isn't necessarily fair. The thing is, while his previous symphony, the Seventh, was clearly modeled on a Brahms style of symphony, here Dvořák was inspired by Tchaikovsky's writing. You see, when Dvořák first heard Tchaikovsky's Fifth Symphony, he was initially startled by the unusual character and original tone color, but soon understood its greatness and began to study it carefully in the months before writing his Eighth Symphony. There are certainly many elements of Tchaikovsky's writing he includes still within his own particular style, but Tchaikovsky's influence is clear, particularly in how he structures the individual movements as well as the larger scale work. Furthermore, Dvořák shows in this symphony his gift for creative variation, intentionally treating the thematic material that he avoids as he calls the unusual, universally applied and recognized forms, finding innovative creative methods of cohesion. It's worth noting that while the Eighth Symphony is set in a major happy key, it contains many moods ranging from contemplative joy to deep melancholy to torrential rage. The first movement begins in G minor with a mournful elegiac theme in the cello, horns, and clarinets, whose low-voiced orchestration mimics the slow intro of Tchaikovsky's Fifth. This is the first time Dvořák uses a proper slow introduction in one of his symphonies, and in doing so outlines the larger key areas of the whole symphony, starting in G minor, which is the key of the third movement, moving through E flat major, the key of the second movement, and ending on G major again, the key of the whole work. Interestingly enough, he actually repeats this material from the slow introduction 2 more times throughout the movement, at the beginning of structurally important moments, first quietly in the development, the same as the opening, and then in the recapitulation he has it boisterously declared in the brass section, with torrential strings underneath. This is once again something he got from Tchaikovsky, but Tchaikovsky waited till the last movement of the Fifth to have the grand repetition of the slow introduction. Dvořák had it all wrapped up in the first movement. Out of the final happy chord of the intro emerges a solo flute bird call that eventually morphs into the rhythmic driver of the movement. Now, fun fact about Dvořák, he was an ardent bird lover who kept pigeons his whole life. Knowing this was not a pigeon, I looked up birds native to the area of Czechia where he composed, and I'm reasonably sure the bird he was replicating was a great tit, heard here. After the orchestra builds into a frenzy of bird calls, Dvořák gives us a series of melodies, starting with a passionate romance from the violins, moving to a somber folk tune in the winds that builds to a fervor with a dramatic trombone interjection, morphing into a B major melody, rife with grand, cascading Wagnerian scales that dissipate and modulate back into the material of the introduction. The whole movement is a thrilling adventure in how one can manipulate and adjust various phrases of melodic material into creating dramatic moments. Personally, I like to think of it like the opening to the movie Beauty and the Beast, where she's walking through the town and there's all these little things happening that paint a portrait of the world she's living in, although that equally describes the first movement of Beethoven's Sixth Symphony just as easily. The second movement, a slow movement, depicts a hot, languid day of summer. There are reverse bird calls, light-hearted children skipping down a hill, and ecclesiastic responsorials, which Dvořák would have been very familiar with, as he was very Catholic. You can see that first in the clarinets here. In between sort of a reverse bird call with the flutes of... you get this crunchy chord with the clarinets going... The third movement of the symphony is absolutely one of my favorites of the orchestral literature, a melancholy waltz. This certainly takes after Tchaikovsky again, as usually this movement would be a scherzo, but Tchaikovsky put a waltz in his Fifth Symphony, so now we get to hear Dvořák's version of a waltz movement. Here we see Dvořák's compositional prowess on full display, with the lush melodic lament in the strings underpinned by noodly rhythms in the winds. This is interjected by a simple optimistic aria in the winds with a hemiola rhythm in the strings. A hemiola, of course, is when you have a 2-beat rhythm imposed over a 3-beat rhythm. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Now, Brahms in particular was masterful at using hemiolas in his work, which Dvořák certainly learned from, so it's worth noting that while he was inspired by Tchaikovsky, he didn't exactly abandon Brahms in the process, as some have suggested, rather synthesized a new perspective into his process. The fourth movement allows us to see Dvořák's talent for variation on full display, as it is a literal theme and variations. It begins with a boisterous trumpet fanfare, introducing the elegant, classical simplicity of the theme, like a king arriving to court. The theme of the fourth movement actually takes inspiration from the bird call theme of the first movement. So in the first movement where we have... in the fourth movement we have... Don't be fooled by the quiet simplicity of the theme in its first statement, though. What Dvořák molds out of it in the variations goes absolutely haywire, from wild calls in the horn, acrobatics in the flute, to a hefty folk dance that eventually calls back our trumpet fanfare. He then slowly returns to the quiet intimacy of the original theme, exploring a yearning romance with the strings and then the clarinet, before then going fully haywire again at the end. So why do we listen to Dvořák? Well, the fact is pretty much everyone loves Dvořák. Our concertmaster Mark pointed out to me recently that Dvořák's Ninth Symphony was played more than any other symphony by orchestras around the world last year, even over something as notorious as Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Still, Dvořák is often eschewed as a pops composer, which is often attributed to him writing such catchy tunes in his work. But what he does with these tunes is what makes him the brilliant composer that he is, appealing both to the average listener, but showing a deep mastery of craft in variation, rhythm, orchestration, and structure. When I spoke earlier of the Germanic hegemony criticizing Dvořák for not adhering to their strict set of art rules, I wasn't just speaking of the past. You see, the field of musicology, which is a combination of music analysis and history, was mostly founded in Germany in the 19th century after German unification as a way of displaying cultural dominance. This field then moved largely to the United States around World War II, retaining its cultural biases while asserting that there is an objective formula for good art. This certainly isn't unique to music. Anyone who's studied art history knows of the French academies who decided that certain subjects were better art than other subjects, portraiture being more art than landscape somehow. The thing is, when we uphold these outdated, nationalistically informed ideas of art, we end up limiting ourselves to the discovery of creativity that exists outside of these strict set of rules. Dvořák was Czech and proudly Czech, and no one who hears his music can escape the magic in how he is able to craft spontaneity within a form that is both massive and deliberate. Thank you for watching this video. We hope you can join us for our upcoming concert, Demons and Angels, where the Etobicoke Philharmonic will be performing this symphony, as well as Matthew Donnelly's Gravedigger's Waltz and Rachmaninoff's Rhapsody on a Theme of Paganini, with soloist Michael Berkowski on piano. That concert is again on Friday, October 17th at 8 p.m. Link in the description for more information. Also, feel free to like and subscribe to this channel, as well as follow us on Facebook and Instagram for more information on upcoming shows. We hope to see you in the concert hall!